on brand.
Right? And on. Nice. Well, happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
And happy CultureCast Day, everybody. We are live together, not even virtual. Nick Sonnenberg and I. Hello. Say hello.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my God.
This is so much more fun than it would have been over Zoom, isn't it?
Right? I think let's just prove to everybody it's time to get back together, everyone. And if you could be IRL, then sit right next to each other in a podcast studio, live from PNT Knitwear bookstore and podcast studio, 180 Orchard Street in Lower East. For those of you who are here in New York, happy Valentine's Day, happy Fashion Week, as well as happy day 8 of your book launch, my friend.
Thank you. I am exhausted, but it's going well so far.
Right on. Well, hey, everybody, thank you for joining us. We're super excited to have Nick joining us today. I know we're going to talk about creating a culture of high performance and the way to get there. And as you all know, Nick is the CEO and founder of Leverage, as well as the author of Come Up for Air. I think you all have either purchased the book or read the book by now. Super excited to talk to you about all the concepts. But before we get into that, let's get to know you, Nick. Let's talk
What do you want
about
to know?
who Nick is and how the heck did you end up starting a company that's all about efficiency? Like, how did that even happen?
Well, I've always been obsessed with time, even when I was a kid. Like, my mom is super long-winded, and she would give me bedtime stories, and at the end, I'd be like, just speed it up.
Wow.
So she wore red and got eaten by a wolf. I get it. Let's move on. And I've always just felt that time is our most precious asset. And I'm also really good at I'm good at math, and I like to think in terms of systems and processes. And eventually, my career led me to high frequency trading prior to all this, which has nothing to do directly with efficiency, except there's actually a lot to do with efficiency because I'm making the markets more efficient. I'm automating how I trade stocks, all based off of algorithms. And in that space, I really developed this deep appreciation for the value of time even further, because like a microsecond can literally mean millions. And so, you know, by 25, I'm managing billions of dollars, got this random job doing high frequency trading.
So crazy.
And I did that for 8 years and really, really loved it. And eventually had a passion for startups and made the leap. I had some money in the bank. I was 30, no kids, no serious obligations. And one thing led to another, and got into the productivity space because I'm passionate about saving time. And, you know, I'm always trying to cut a corner. Like in college, I graduated a year early because I was like trying to optimize my course catalog. You know, I'm always trying to find, how do I cut a corner and just get to where I'm going to faster? And so in the end, it kind of felt really natural to land in this space where I'm at now, which is we do operational efficiency consulting and training for large organizations.
I think there's also something inspiring to share about your story as well. As I listen to you, first of all, time is money, period. And high frequency trading, the more efficient you can be, the more money you can make, right?
Well, like a microsecond could be the difference between millions of dollars. We would have companies come, and literally the conversations were wild. It's like, hey, do you want to invest X million dollars because we can shave off 10 microseconds to send an order from New York to Chicago? You know, we're having conversations about what's the height of the cell tower so that we can calculate how direct of a path it will be to send something from New York to Chicago. So yeah, it's literally nanoseconds that we're looking at.
Well, I also see that there's a personal connection, and I know there's a lot of people on the CultureCast right now who are either in this pivot where they want to actually leave corporate life and maybe be an entrepreneur and their own thing, because everyone is coming out of this pandemic with, you know, understanding who they are. And I keep saying this, now more than ever, doing business is personal. And what I'm learning from a lot of people is that they want to do their own personal thing. And if I recall, one of the stories you talked about before you actually made the move to do your own thing was, weren't you vacationing with one of your best friends? You need to share that story.
Yeah. So I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was. I always thought that my job was the coolest. You know, I'm like in my mid-20s, I'm living the baller life. I've got 16 computer screens at some point. I mean, managing billions and billions of dollars. And the story you're referring to is my friend Aaron Schiff and I were in Turks and Caicos together, and he's on his laptop having a pina colada. I talk about this in the book. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what do you mean you're working? And he was explaining to me that he's running his company and he doesn't have a boss and he can work wherever he wants, whenever he wants. And that really was a big aha moment for me, because I was thinking to myself, well, what's the end game here? Like, what does success look like? And ultimately, for me, it was freedom. And money is one aspect to getting freedom. But, you know, also not having a boss, not having to, you know, being able to choose where I want to work, who I want to work with, so on and so forth. And ultimately, a big reason why I left trading was, you know, I found some difficulties with culture on the team.
Sure.
I was also the only American on the trading desk. It was French all day long. So that was very difficult for me to collaborate with people. So that's something I don't talk about all that much, but it definitely did play a big role in me taking the risk. It wasn't an easy decision ultimately, you know, to leave a job where financially you're extremely stable to then go into this, you know, completely unknown territory where you don't know if it's going to work or not work.
Yeah, I think you didn't know it was going to work, but if we hear your story, you are passionate about efficiency. You are passionate about saving time, and you're passionate about math, which we had dinner last night, by the way, and it was just funny the way you even made the order efficient when the server was explaining how to get a seafood tower for 4 people.
Well, you know, another thing with high frequency trading is it's not just math, it's also thinking about risk in a different way.
Okay.
And so last night I was more in my risk thinking mode. I'm like, if there's a miscommunication right here, there's risk that they're going to charge us $500 for some oysters and some shrimp. And I wanted to minimize that risk.
Okay. No, that's actually a great example of really translating high frequency trading to how you order efficiently. So let's fast forward then. When you founded your company, tell me about that.
So when I first left high frequency trading, are we allowed to cuss on this?
Yeah, why not?
Oh, I was scared shitless. Like I literally, the day that I quit, and it took me years to build up the courage to quit. And during like the last year or two of being a trader, nights and weekends, I was going to General Assembly and other places to learn about marketing, about, you know, design, so on and so forth. But when I quit, I was like, this might not work. Like high frequency trading, I was doing something called index arbitrage. It's such a niche specific thing that we're doing. I was like, you know, I'm an expert at this one sliver of finance. Am I going to be able to make this work in other places? And it was scary. And I first left to build an app called Calvin, which was a scheduling tool.
Okay.
So it was still in this productivity space, still about saving time. And then during that process, Marin, who you met actually in Mexico at my event.
Santos.
Yeah. So do you know this story with Marin?
I don't think I know the story of
So
Marin.
Marin started Zirtual, which
that's
is a
right.
virtual assistant company. And I was a client of them. And I was having dinner with my ex-business partner, and they announced bankruptcy that day. And so we were just chatting over dinner, myself and now my ex-business partner. We were just friends back then. And we were brainstorming, what did they do wrong? Like, what was wrong with their business model? And we had this idea to build a freelancer marketplace in a different, slightly different way. And so at the end of that dinner, it was kind of cool what we came up with. So I'm like, look, I'm pretty busy right now with Calvin, but on the side, I can build a back end in like a day.
Yeah.
I could just kind of hack together a few tools. If you get 5 clients, let's launch on day 2 and just give this a try. Fast forward a month, we're on stage following Tony Robbins at a conference, close the whole room signing up. And you fast forward a year, and it grew very quickly, too quickly, and with a lot of issues. But on the surface, we had a tremendous success that first year.
Well, say more about, and I guess say more about growing too quickly, and then we'll jump into how you define culture. Yeah.
So, I think that the market in general, they reward growth, I think, and that's what's impressive to people. And now we're living at a time even where, valuations of companies have just gotten hammered because now they're realizing like, hey, maybe that wasn't the thing to necessarily optimize for. Maybe profitability is important, turns out, right? And we fell into that trap too. We didn't raise money, but we were just optimizing for revenue growth. So we achieved that optimization. We grew to a large size, 7 figures in the first year, 150 people on the team, all really impressive. But under the hood, it was a complete cluster. We were in all this debt. We were losing a ton of money. Our org chart was super smart. It was just 2 of us. He was people facing. I was non-people facing. Coming from a high frequency background, my day was like 12 hours with headphones on thinking about some complex math all day. So I didn't want to be managing a whole bunch of people. And so one day in October, he comes up to me when we're working at a co-working space, and he tells me he's out. Not in 2 weeks, not in 2 days. He's out in 2 minutes.
Wow. Tap down in the moment.
He's out. Didn't even have time to finish my coffee. And I go white, and I'm thinking this can't be real, because on the surface, we were a huge success. Under the hood, with all these problems, I was like, this is going to be tough. And it was. For the following 3 months, we lose about 40% of revenue. I'm cashing out my 401k. My dad's taking a second mortgage on his house.
Yikes.
And it's hard. People complain about having to move into their parents' basement. Try taking your father to the bank to sign, equity line agreements is not easy. So I had to make the decision, do I bankrupt the company or not? And ultimately I saw a path to cleaning things up. So I stuck it out, and we did start seeing improvements. And it started forcing me to refine this framework that eventually I developed that's part of this book that we'll talk about, come up for air. And people started reaching out, asking me to help them too. And so I worked with 7-figure financial advisors. I worked with Poopery, the poop spray, and other very large companies. Everyone had the same problem. So eventually what I realized was, hey, there's all these new ways of working. And we always started remote. So it forced us to test how to use these tools in new, innovative ways. And it made me realize, look, there's all these new ways of working. There's all these new collaboration tools. No one's ever been taught when and how to use these. There's a massive opportunity that can, if people use these right, we saw that you can save a full business day a week, plus improve culture.
That's right.
So it's not just bottom line, it's also culture, because there's less stress, there's more trust, so on and so forth. And ultimately, I realized this is what we can be world class in. This is kind of more blue ocean. There's no one else really world experts yet at this. The people that got rich in the gold rush were the ones that sold the shovels. Let's teach people how to, the best practices that we've been defining all these years. And so now that's what we do at Leverage, and that's what my book is about. And I want to impact, I want to save millions and millions of hours of people's time. Like, what better gift could I give than that?
Time is money. I'm going to have to say that again. So one thing I want to say about culture that I know I believe in, especially with leaders, right? So you're the CEO and founder of your company. I always say that culture is a reflection of the top. It's also having real clarity about who you are and what you stand for. And it seems like huge lesson learned, the first time around with your co-partner, and then pivoting to, all right, how do you live your truth? How do you live your brand, right?
It was the best thing that happened to me, though, because I wouldn't be here, on CultureCast today. I wouldn't have a book out on this with HarperCollins. Our business, we would have been doing my friend Ben Hardy has a book coming out called 10x is easier than 2x. And what the premise of his book is, it's sometimes it's easier to completely just break something and think of a completely new way of doing
Yeah.
it rather than like trying to like polish a turd a bit,
Yeah.
and so that's the premise of his. And had I not have completely been thrown in the deep end
Yeah.
with this, I wouldn't have developed this framework. Probably I wouldn't have had this book. And also just from a culture standpoint, although it was difficult and I had like a mass exodus on both the client and the team side,
But yeah.
because rumors were being spread.
Well,
like
your personal life was on the line. Your dad's house was on the line.
I mean, it was wild.
Yeah.
Like when I tell you wild, like people were reaching out to me. Like I've never had racism like to me, but people were like
what?
calling me like a Jew.
Okay.
Like it was crazy.
That's stupid.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Like people that had been hired that I'd never even spoken to were like coming at me in really bad ways. It was wild. But now we're a fraction of the size, doing way more revenue, profit, etc. And I still have some of the people that were around then.
Amazing.
So from a culture standpoint, we've got battle wounds together. Like we've gone through war together. So like that although during the moment it was really tough, now we're left with this really strong nucleus that like bonds us that you can't teach, you can't buy. The only way to get what we have right now is to have gone through a crazy experience.
That's right. So let's talk about culture. So when you think about culture, the word culture, how would you define it?
I've thought about this actually a lot. So the way I look at it is, how can you get a group of people to have the same type of behaviors and beliefs collectively? And I actually asked Darcy, who you met in Mexico as part of our little club. And I asked her the same question. And I wanted to read to you what she said, because I liked her response. She said, culture is the collective consciousness of what a group of people says, feels, thinks, and does. But I think ultimately it's, how do you get a group of people to be aligned on how they make decisions, how they explain something, how they behave? You can't have an internal company wiki that's 10 million pages long that explains, if this, do this, if this, do this. So you have to kind of create some type of framework so that people can make decisions, act in a certain way that you would expect with some level of predictability.
Right. Also, I think it's the kind of framework that as you attract newer people to this new company that you've now reset, right, that they actually choose to be part of it.
Or choose not to, which is totally fine too. Which
self-select out, right.
Which, like your not to-do list is more important than your to-do list. Like making people self-select out actually is probably even more valuable than the ones that self-select in, because the value of a bad hire, could be way worse than the upside of a good hire sometimes.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. They're looking for, with this great reflection that has happened as a result of the pandemic, people are now thinking, all right, if I'm going to go join somebody or an organization, then it better be aligned to my purpose, how I roll, what my personal values are.
Totally.
Right. And you're saying, outside looking in, if I were to join your company, then, I would meet you and all of the other OGs on your team, as well as noobs, I would assume, to just get what I need to see if that vibes with me.
Yeah. And our culture is not for everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And so there are some people where it's perfect. There's people on our team where they live and breathe efficiency. Like we're geeking out, like, hey, did you see this new app? Like did you see this new feature here? We can save a second.
Wow.
But that's a high frequency trader mindset, because I know a second isn't just a second. If that happens 60 times a day, that's a minute a day, 5 minutes a week, 20 minutes, 20 minutes a month, 4 hours a year times a team of whatever your team is, it starts to add up a lot. So we're always looking at things in terms of team productivity rather than individual productivity. But yeah, our culture, we work hard, we play hard, we are remote, so you can work wherever you want, basically whenever you want. Unlimited vacation day, but there are high expectations. We make it really clear kind of what the expectations are. This is how you're going to be measured. I think that and then it all comes back to being aligned. If you need to align with people what the expectations are and how performance is going to be measured. But for me, people are always like, do you believe in a 4-day work week, a 3-day work week? I'm like, I think you should mutually align on what success looks like,
That's right.
and not worry about kind of the secondary details around that.
I totally agree. And I think it's also based on the culture that you're trying to create in your company. There's no rule around that. And I think people are still trying to solve for that. I get asked that question a lot. Like, do you believe in the new 4-day work week? I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Some companies have already been doing that because that's the culture that they are, and that's how they get their work done. So let's talk about Come Up for Air and this framework that you've created. So can you talk about your framework?
Yeah. So at this point, we've worked with thousands of teams.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter if you're $1 million a year pet hospital or you're literally a $100 billion tech company. What we found is every team, every organization has the same foundational requirements to be efficient. And it turns out that there's 3 buckets or 3 drawers. You need to communicate with people internally and externally. You need to plan. So you've got tasks and you have projects. And you have resources. You have your SOPs, your processes. Yep. And so this was kind of when I was late at night, working those 24-hour shifts during that crazy time period. That's where I kind of started to realize, hey, these are the 3 buckets we need to focus on, because during that time, I couldn't just click a button and know what's Aiden working on right now, right? Or, hey, what did Andrew tell me? Was that in a text? Was that in an email? Was that in a DM in Slack? Was that in a group chat? And I was wasting so much time on things where I'm like, this is so basic. And so it forced me to kind of realize those buckets.
Okay.
And there's different tools available now that help you, that, companies have invested billions and billions of dollars developing great technology in each of these in each of these areas. And what I noticed is 99.99% of teams and organizations don't have any policy or framework in terms of when they should use each of these types of tools. Primarily, most companies are just run off of text and email. They don't, when you onboard people, and I'm curious what would happen at some of the companies you've been involved with, you get a lot about sexual harassment, core values, but it's not, at company ABC, this is how we work. This is how we collaborate. We use this tool for this type of thing. We use this tool for this type of thing. And they don't give any kind of training.
Yeah.
And it's like learning a language. Imagine if you're primarily French and you try to hire a Japanese person and try to hire, a Spanish speaker. It's going to be hard to get work done.
Totally.
And it's the same with these tools. And with what I realized was the underlying principle with all this is companies and people, when they're overwhelmed and they're drowning in work, which is why I called the book Come Up for Air.
Right.
What do you do when you're drowning in work? You just try to cut corners and just get things off your plate as quickly as possible, because you literally don't have a free second. So you start playing this game of hot potato, just take it. And when everyone's playing this game of hot potato, and back to math, we call it a local optimization. When you're just doing these local optimizations, you'll text, you'll email, you'll do whatever it takes just to move on to the next thing. But when everyone's playing that game, this scavenger hunt accumulates, and then nothing is organized. Then you have to go and find that document next week.
Right.
Or what did I tell Andrew? And then you're spending a million times longer stitching things together, trying to go on the scavenger hunt. So what I realized is the name of the game is, how do you align people where different pieces of information goes so that it's easy to retrieve stuff, not transfer? And that shifts the entire strategy from being a local to being a global optimization. And in your personal life, when you do your laundry, the fastest way to be done with your laundry is you take it out of the dryer and throw it in one drawer. But most people don't. Most people separate their socks in one drawer, their underwear in another drawer, and you spend that extra few seconds or minute. You invest that time because tomorrow when you have to put an outfit together, you can retrieve what you're looking for much faster.
That's right.
It's the same thing in business. It's just CPR are those drawers. There's different tools that help you to achieve, optimal efficiency in each of those drawers. And you need to change the culture to be a culture of retrieval. And you need, HR departments need to start training people from the onset, during onboarding. This stuff needs to be integrated in onboarding so that before, 2 weeks and they've already got 1 million projects and they can't come up for air, HR teams need to start getting this stuff from day one into their onboarding and training.
I mean, the last company that I was at, before the pandemic started, we got this new collaboration tool called WebEx. And I'm a nerd and I was an early adopter. There was training for WebEx that not everyone signed up to go and do.
It wasn't mandatory?
Not mandatory. They're just like, oh, so first it was rolled to the executives and then everybody else. And they said, go to this WebEx overview. I'm like, I'm going to go. I want to learn how to use this tool because my team was not all in one building. They were out in the field. They were in other parts of the country, around the world, et cetera. And it was fun to learn WebEx, right? And how do I actually have these meetings, at least as a way of communicating and having everyone in the same room, so to speak, virtually. But then I think about fast forward, the pandemic happens. We still weren't back 2 weeks, 2 months. And I think into that, our training team actually put together training just for the existing team members, specifically, I'll say office-based, who are now working from home in their home office, on how to use these collaboration tools.
Oh, so you guys did create internal training?
Yeah, there was internal training, but it was because we needed to do it, because it was a lot of this running around, okay, where's this information? How do I get to this person? And even, I mean, simple things too, like putting notices in WebEx, like where you are, et cetera. That just helps people instead of, I'm trying to track Nick down. I don't know where he is, right? So
totally. Yeah. Was the training mandatory?
It wasn't mandatory. And I think that's part of the problem because you've got people who are trained on it and then people who are not. And so you can't be as efficient as you can be.
Why the decision to not make it mandatory?
I think everyone was just feeling so overwhelmed, and it feels like it's going against what you're saying. It's actually creating more overwhelming feelings when not everyone's on the same page.
It's tricky when you're in quicksand, like one of the things with this stuff that you have to be really strategic with. What's the first thing to fix? Because when people have a full plate and they're already drowning, you got to give them some quick wins to just create a little bit of breathing room. But I've seen most companies completely miss this and not be focused on any training whatsoever inside of their companies.
Yeah.
And it's just wild to me because it's not just saving time, which can, if you can give back 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week to your employees, that they can then go and work on a key project that's going to really drive profit. They can not be super stressed out where, if everyone's stressed out, they're not going to be doing the same quality of work. It's going to impact culture because you're going to start snapping at people, right? And also it's going to affect culture because trust will deteriorate. If I don't trust that if I ask you to do something, that it's going to get done, and it's not because, for me, trust comes in multiple forms. I might trust you that you have integrity and you're not going to steal from me, but I might not trust you in the context of, if I ask you to do something, I think there's a 50-50 chance it gets done because you don't have good systems. You might not capture it in the right way. I know you've got a lot on your plate. So now I need to follow up with you over text, over email, over Slack. Hey, I just want to make sure, is that still getting done? So now I've wasted my time following up 4 different ways.
Yeah.
It's added stress to me. You feel like I'm micromanaging, and it's a domino effect, right? So if people are on the same page, it saves time, but also, which again goes to those big projects, but it also helps culture. So that's why this conversation right now is so relevant, because efficiency and culture to me go completely hand in hand.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's just so super relevant. Who would have thought? And what I mean by that is, yes, I think efficiency and culture go hand in hand. You made this comment earlier around, is it better to grow 10x or 2x, right? And when I think about high growth, and believe me, I've been in a lot of high growth situations, and where you become less effective is when, again, this happens, right? You create a cluster because there's no aligned way of how you communicate, how you retrieve information, how you share information, et cetera. And I think that slows down growth. And what I'm hearing you say, and actually I was having a conversation with someone that I call the culture guru. Her name is Barbara Perry, and did a lot of work at Starbucks in driving culture. And she said this comment, and the way I resonated is, she said, change can only happen as fast as people can learn, right? Like that needs to be equal. And what your framework tells me, as I'm a culture nerd as well, it creates a learning organization. And I think that
Totally.
is part of a culture that needs to exist in order for a company to grow.
Totally. And the whole underlying premise of my framework
Yeah.
is optimize for retrieval instead of transfer. So that also kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about, because to be a learning culture, you need things to be easy to access, right? You don't want one risk that someone leaves and all the knowledge goes out their head. You want to capture all that knowledge. You want to capture decisions made and how best practice. Companies have invested millions and millions of dollars making error. Like, it's fine to make an error as long as it's not deadly and as long as you've learned something from it and it's not going to happen again, or
That's right.
lower chances, right? So you want to make sure that things are documented so that they can be retrieved, so that you don't have risk of someone leaving, so you don't have risk of a mistake happening again or an error happening. And it's super important.
Yeah, I agree. And one other thing I was thinking about, this learning culture and why it's so relevant for today. I mean, there's a lot of companies that are downsizing, right? And we heard your story about how, with your partner under the hood, it's kind of like, wow,
Yeah.
we're not practicing what we're preaching.
Yep.
And I think companies today are downsizing and now trying to figure out, how do we continue to do more with less people, right? And again, it's not even about that mentality. It's like, how do you create a good quality of life for the people that are there so that they can be as effective as they can be when there were, 10,000 more people in the company.
Well, two
Yeah.
things. One, back to your friend Barbara was her
Yeah.
name. Being a learning culture, I think, is more important now than ever. I mean, the rate of change in business is
Yeah.
faster than ever. Now there's blockchain, there's quantum computing coming out. Like, business models are getting disrupted, and there's these new technologies.
Yes.
So if you don't have a culture of learning and you're still operating in old ways and you're relying on tribal knowledge, I think you're gonna have a tough time in the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of companies that still like that.
Yeah.
Just saying, large
And-
companies.
And, it's about priorities too. I think in the past, a lot of people prioritize short term. Basically, they like heavily weighted their chips on short term versus long term,
Yeah.
where I think this efficiency stuff, it's, are you playing the long game or the short game? Because always tomorrow, if you just need to maximize how much you're making tomorrow, documenting something in your knowledge base is probably not going to generate quick cash that you could on a sales call tomorrow.
Yeah.
So there needs to be alignment from the leadership. Hey, it's okay that we're not 100% on short term. We're going to go 80% short term, and we're going to invest on this long term stuff too, because that's important
Yeah.
as well. And it's like, if you have a sink overflowing with water, you can say it takes an hour to patch the pipe or 5 minutes to mop the floor. Everyone's just mopping the floor because it's 5 minutes and now you go back to sales. But if every week you got to do the 5 minutes, after 12 weeks, you were better off just patching the pipe, because now for the rest of time, you're still spending 5 minutes a week versus you could have been done by now. And so people need to be able to swallow that pill and sacrifice. Hey, we're gonna make this investment, not of money, but of time and energy, so that we never have to waste time on that activity going forward. But that's my long-winded.
Yeah,
now I'll
that's
circle back
okay.
to yours about the downsizing. Companies are downsizing, and we're going through potentially a recession right now. And according to Mark Zuckerberg, there's a bunch of articles that have come out about the year of efficiency. There's so much complexity that gets added to an organization with every new hire.
Totally.
And I think that a lot of companies overhired potentially to compensate for a lack of efficiency. And I think that came back to bite them. And I think that I've seen so many people think that the best way to increase their capacity is through hiring more people and throwing bodies at a problem.
Yep.
And it's kind of like, you want to cook a dinner, you hire a private chef, but at some point, if you keep hiring private chefs and you have 30 in your kitchen, there's too many cooks in the kitchen. People are getting in the way. And in math, there's network theory called Metcalfe's law, which talks about, how many different, it's if you have two cell phones, there's one person you can call. Yeah. Every cell phone you add to a network, it's exponential the more ways communication can happen. But it's the same way in business. Every person that you hire, there's exponentially more ways for information to get transferred, lost, things to slip through the cracks. And so many people go the route of oh, we need to increase capacity, let's hire people. And as you know, you have to pay for recruiting, onboarding, training, pay for a salary, and then you have this exponential complexity problem. And there's the other way that you can increase capacity. So that to me is the worst way. The
Yeah.
second way is you tell people to work 100 hours a week.
Work harder.
People don't
Damn
really
it.
love that.
Yeah.
And so then you got efficiency, which to me is what I'm passionate about. Like, how do you just remove the roadblocks, remove the friction, and allow people to work on things that give them joy, tap into their unique ability, and give them a chance of working on the, doing the best work of their life. And so all this downsizing, I think, is a function of using hiring as a strategy to increase capacity instead of focusing on more of a long-term solution, which is how do you make sure that every person that you add to your organization, you're getting full utilization out of?
Totally agree. And I think when you describe how you throw people at the problem, I feel like in my last few roles at these public companies where I had the chance to be, the chief of people or the head of HR, it is literally cleaning up after the parade when it's like, well, they grew so quickly and then there's this plateau. And what are we going to do to really unlock that? Right. And it is diagnosing the problem. At least the problem was, what capabilities do we really need to have?
Mm-hmm.
And I have found organizations where instead of really taking a step back and getting clarity around the work, et cetera, we just threw people or bodies at the problem to fix. And so,
have you ever seen that work in terms of a strategy?
No, never,
Yeah.
never, because then you have to go back and reset. And I think about my relationship to math. I loved it in high school, but was a biology major,
I didn't know that.
Not a math major. But I think about everything you're talking about, and it is about math, where you have to understand all the variables to define the problem. And that's essentially what you're talking about, right? And in so many ways, in how people can actually find more efficiency in what they're doing, and how companies actually need, and people say this all the time, go slow and move fast, right? It's a long-term game, because at the end of the day, you need to understand the problems you're trying to solve, or what is the root cause of what the issue is. And I think for companies today, yes, it's unfortunate that with this massive acceleration in digital, right, and automation that's happened for a lot of companies, let's just hire a bunch more people. And now it's kind of like, how do we fix this? Because now growth in public companies especially is not valued. It's really about flow through and the efficiency.
And it's so
and leverage.
And
yeah,
no
leverage,
pun intended.
Yeah.
But back to the complexity scales exponentially, it is so much harder to make any change. I mean, the transformations we make is around efficiency. So we'll train a company on, how to better use project management tools, or how to roll out Slack, or one of these things. But doing it for a team of 200 versus 100 isn't twice as hard. It's like 100 times as hard, and I'd imagine with culture, it's the same thing. Like, you get to 1,000 people, changing the culture, trying to implement new core values, trying to implement a new way of doing something. It's like moving a boulder versus moving a pebble. So staying small, I think, is an advantage. And you should really hire, in my opinion, not as a first resort, but as a last resort in most cases.
Yeah, I agree with you. Although some people would say, no, we need more headcount because we can't get the work done. And so
there's always use cases. I'm not trying to be black and white with this stuff. There are scenarios where you absolutely need to hire people. I'm just suggesting people should make sure that they're getting utilization out of their team.
That's
like
right.
in my experience, when I look at most people, they're wasting 20 to 40% of their time. When we survey people, it's like, what percentage of time do you spend going on a scavenger hunt, working on things that, say your time is worth $100 an hour.
Yeah.
How much of your day is spent on things that you think a $10 or $20 an hour person could do? Huge percentage of time. And so I'm just suggesting audit that, like, take a look at that first and see if there's some quick wins you can make there. But of course, you're throwing a huge event next week and you literally just need physical bodies. Like, yeah, there are situations, but
yeah, I'm going to take a peek at some comments, since there's a lot of people in here who are just talking about everything you're saying around efficiency, not spending more money on things, and throwing it at the problem.
And I'm just
Yeah.
curious, why do you think it is? Do you think that it's shifting now that these larger companies are starting to now be more focused on? Are you seeing that in your
Yeah, oh,
experience?
totally. I mean, the last round of earnings calls that have happened, there are some really big ones that have happened
Mm,
in the last couple of weeks. And the focus, if you look at analysts now looking at the actual leverage of a company, no pun intended again, and the profitability of a company,
mm.
I think that's when you start thinking, all right, am I really putting that labor line to use,
Yeah.
right? And what other things do I need to be doing to ensure that we're really driving efficiency with how we spend our capital, right?
Well, I guess when like multiples are like 50x on top line revenue, people's incentives are, you know, you kind of your strategy is a function of where your incentives are. So I guess
Totally
if Wall
agree.
Street is valuing companies in a certain way, that's going to drive certain strategy and influence, your hiring strategy. But
Yeah,
now that there's been a bit of a correction there, I'm guessing that this is going to be a hot topic for 2023
I think
and
so
beyond.
too. And I just don't want to lose sight of this is not about cutting headcount. What I want to say on top of that is make sure that you have you're a company of one, you're a company of 100,000 people. Look at your long-term strategy as a company, even annually, what it is you're trying to do. What capability does the company need to have? And I think that defines kind
Totally.
of the skills and resources that you need. And then what are you doing with them? Right. And so I want to make sure we layer that on top, right?
100%.
Yeah.
And also, it might just be that you don't know how to properly utilize your current talent.
That's true.
And like, sure, if these people are wasting 20 to 40%, like maybe that's part of the issue. But if you could, I think that there's an opportunity where these layoffs don't need to be happening to the extent that they are. And if people worked a bit smarter, if companies were getting more value out of these people, um, because of efficiency, because of just maybe being more aligned on what matters most and
Yeah.
making sure that the individual even knows, kind of what the focus should be on and how their performance should be measured. I think that a lot of these layoffs could probably be avoided.
I totally agree. And I think a way of training people is a way of investing in them
Totally.
because they're building new skills that will help them not only here today, but for the future when they do want to move up or move around or whatever, right?
Well, when we do quarterly check-ins with people, so we're
Yeah.
asking them questions like what skill set do you feel like you're lacking that we need to kind of focus on, and we also talk through. It's not that we can solve this every quarter, but what are the 3 things you like doing the least as part of your job, and let's start brainstorming how we can get these things off your plate. So we look at roles as like this dynamic kind of Lego block, so to speak, function where a job is really just the sum of a bunch of micro responsibilities. And you could be the director of marketing, but that today might mean something totally different than it did 2 years ago when you got hired and you had a vague
Totally
job
agree.
description.
Right.
So we're constantly trying to deconstruct what does that role actually mean. And we tried documenting every single micro responsibility, and that became just too much to manage. So now what we're doing is, what are the 3 things that you like the least? Let's have a discussion on how we can get that off your plate. Is there a software? Is there automation? Can we hire someone else? Because what you hate, someone else might love. And then that will free up your time to work on something that you'll be able to add a bigger impact to. And so everyone's role isn't static, it's dynamic, in my opinion.
Again, it goes back to this learning organization and as human beings having that growth mindset because things they're always constantly evolving. Now, if I were listening to our CultureCast, and I love always breaking things down into what is the smallest executable step. So what's the one thing that if you were to give advice to people who are watching and listening in to get started on this, what is the one thing you would suggest?
Oof. Probably the quickest thing is learn how to use email properly.
Okay.
That's like the quickest way to value time. I mean, are we talking to the individual or are we talking to a leader right now?
Well, I
for this
mean,
advice?
if you have a tidbit for the individual and a tidbit for a leader.
Well, I guess for both, we talk about in the book how to use email properly, but like we just see that is like 3 to 5 hours a week, easy back. So that's a good one. I think that meetings are probably one of the other largely inefficient parts of business. We see, I think I read an article like $35 billion
Yeah.
of waste in unproductive meetings. And the funny thing is a lot of a lot of those meetings were about being more productive. So meetings are a big one. There's not enough, people aren't putting together agendas. You don't accomplish what needed to get accomplished. There's
Right.
too many people on the call. They're too long. And so another thing that we really advocate for is, audit your meetings. Like each meeting, think about it in terms of a dollar value. If you've got 4 people on a meeting and they're $100 a person, that's a $400 meeting.
That's right.
And also, it's not just about saving time, it's about optimizing time. So also be aware of where your brain is going to have the highest horsepower, what time slots on your calendar are the most valuable time slots, and optimize around that. If you've got the most important call of the day and you're doing that after 12 Zoom calls, that's
right.
not going to be a good strategy for
No.
you. And so whether you're remote or you're co-located and you're working in person, I think that there's still an opportunity to use all the tools that we've been talking about, to use asynchronous communication. And again, it doesn't matter if you're physically there or not. And you can cut down on a lot of meetings. So many meetings don't need to be as long as they were. How many meetings have you been part of where, well, maybe it sounds like the companies that you've been at, you guys had some pretty good
I know we had a
meeting
big
culture.
conversation
Yeah.
about the meeting culture where there's a very specific agenda. You need to
I love
submit your
that.
pre-reads. You need to actually read them to participate
That's
in the meeting. Right?
super smart.
Yeah.
It's a shame that not enough companies are doing things like that.
Yeah, the agenda also was, what is the ask? Like, are we deciding something?
Yep.
Is there a resource that you need, et cetera? And I agree with you from an agenda standpoint, just getting real clarity about that. Because I've also been in other companies where my first meeting, I'm like, how are there 30 people in this room here who are going to go back and talk to the 30 other people to make a decision?
So if you're on a call and then you're like, oh, show me the numbers. And then on that call at 9 a.m. on a Monday, where that to me could be worth 1,000 an hour instead of 100 an hour, because Monday at 9 a.m., that's after a relaxing weekend, after I've woken up, worked out, had my coffee, my brain's at full horsepower. If I'm using that time slot and someone's sharing their screen, showing me reports and talking at me for 15 minutes, that's not a good use of that time slot.
Right.
Send me a recording of you doing that on Friday. And when I'm in the back of an Uber doing nothing, I'll hit play at 2x speed and I'll watch that. And now we've just saved 15 minutes at the highest value time slot on the whole calendar. So those are two things, whether you're a leader or you're an employee. Get a grip on your calendar and run better meetings. Those are some quick wins. But if you're a leader, I would strongly advise get efficiency to be part of your culture. And that starts with onboarding and making this mandatory. Don't just make it optional. It doesn't have to be 100 tools that you're teaching, but if you use Microsoft, teach them Outlook, teach them how to use Teams properly, set them up for success. Like that first week, don't throw them into a bunch of projects, get them set up in that first week. And now for the next X number of years that they're working at that company, you're going to be getting an extra 20 to 40% out of every single employee that you hire. So you sacrifice the first week, get them up to speed, and now you got an extra 20 to 40% for in perpetuity.
Well, not even perpetuity. I mean, the likelihood that they'll stay beyond 60 days
increases
exponentially.
100%.
That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
And so I know we're coming up at the top of the hour soon, and I always want to ask a question around pop culture. And I've been asking people, what are you wearing lately? What are you listening to or watching that you vibe with? So what's going on with you, Nick?
Well, I just had a book come out, so I haven't been watching as much TV as I usually would. Just started watching this Netflix series. Actually, you might I forget the name of it. It's about this dog that inherited $400 million.
Okay,
have you heard of this?
I have not heard of this.
So this dog, yeah, it's crazy. Like this German Shepherd was like the heiress to some really rich person, gave all the money to the dog, and it's a TV show. We haven't gotten to the end, so it sounds like there's probably some fraud going on here. But like literally, the dog is like eating tomahawk steaks and going on yachts and living.
Who's helping the dog decide how he spends the money?
And that's where I think the fraud comes in, but I haven't gotten to that point.
Oh my
God. Shopping. I mean, this is Dunhill. I have a lot of Dunhill or just Buck Mason. I typically wear plain stuff.
You're a Dunhill kind of dude and a Buck Mason kind of guy. Yeah.
I just got a cool cowboy hat that you will see in Idaho when we go
I
to
can't
Idaho in a
wait.
couple weeks.
I'm going to wear some cowboy boots. Why not?
Yeah, let's just
right?
go full cowboy in
Full
Idaho.
on. Yeah. I'll be
Uh,
more urban cowgirl, but
ooh,
as you know,
what's Mike gonna wear?
Michael kind of has his own style. I don't know that he's going to sign up for any cowboy gear. So,
What are you guys watching?
oh my gosh. I'm just going to own this because I love relationships, and Michael's going to shake his head at me like he is right now. He's off camera, everybody. I love. So The Bachelor, any dating show,
Oh,
because it says a lot about, there's
Did-
always like the wacky behavior, the straightforward one, etc.
did you ever see Rod was on a reality love show? Did you ever see that one?
No, I remember when he mentioned that. I don't
I
think
didn't
I've
watch it
seen
either.
that love show,
Hmm.
but there was one that I came across, and it made me laugh. And I don't think I finished watching it, but it was The Real Love Boat. And so they tried to recreate the Love Boat TV show from the 70s and then make it kind of a dating show where people come on and off and get matched up. And, do they stay on this boat forever? And whoever is kind of at the very end wins the prize. And they tried to recreate the characters like the captain and the social director and the bartender and the doctor, etc.
Well,
so
maybe once I come up for air myself, I'll get back into TV.
I love it.
Actually, there was another show called Alone. Have you ever heard of this one?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Where they just drop you off in like Alaska somewhere with 10 tools and you just survive as long as you can. And it's all self-filmed. That's a cool show.
Wow. I mean, the one show that I do love that I binge watch, which you can easily do on Netflix, season 3 came out, to Emily in Paris. Excellent fashion.
I see a theme here.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'll just watch the first one because we went to Paris over the holidays. I'll watch the rest on the plane. Yeah, that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. I'm a binger too.
All right, right on. Well, I want to close with this question, which is CPR framework. I mean, I think about, is that on purpose? What I mean by that is, is it a way to revive a company? Just saying.
It all just fell together. So
Okay.
CPR came first. I started like, that was my aha. You need to communicate, plan, resource. And then, when I decided to write the book, I started the book 4 years ago. It all just came natural. I'm like, well, my framework is CPR. Everyone's telling me that they're drowning in work and that they need to, like, literally you talk to people. It's like, how's it going? I'm drowning. I just need to come up for air. I mean, I say it too.
Right.
So it all just was like, CPR, come up for air. It's all on brand. And it just kind of quickly came to be.
Yeah, I love it because it's a way, if we close with being together on Valentine's Day, and a way that all of you can practice self-love is really to take care of yourself. And this is one way, even if it's just one thing that you do for yourself to become more efficient.
Yeah.
It is about reviving your life.
Yeah. Well,
right?
what's that phrase on a plane? Put the oxygen mask on yourself first.
Right. That's right. Before you help others. Well, I want to heart you, Nick. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This is
with
fun.
me. And I love that we got to be together since we were live together
So
in New
awesome.
York, in NYC, one of my favorite hometowns, at PNT Knitwear Bookstore and Podcast Studio. So shout out to them for allowing us to crash their party here and have our podcast live.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Oh my gosh, so good. All right, Nick. And we'll see everybody later. Thanks for joining.